Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a well-known and well-respected educator from Cape Town, South Africa, David Marriott. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ashutosh. It's wonderful to be here. Yeah.
Thank you. David is the founder and chief executive officer of Ubuntu Education. So, David, before we talk about Ubuntu, tell me about your own journey in brief and what inspired you to focus on educational leadership in Africa.
Well, Ashutosh, actually, my journey in education is now nearly 20 years old. I've been in education for that time. I actually grew up in South Africa and went to school in South Africa and, did all my tertiary education, most of my tertiary education in South Africa as well. But I moved over to the UK about 25 years ago, and I trained as a teacher in the UK. And so my experience in education actually started out as an English teacher in a small village school. But then I always wanted to go into education because I felt in a way that I could make a school experience a bit better than the experience that I had for myself.
Right.
So to cut a long story short, I ended up leading an international school in Malawi, which is obviously in the heart of East Africa, for many years, and absolutely loved the experience. And then in the middle of COVID, I moved back to the UK, but I just really felt that I wanted to kind of give back, in a sense, to the education in Africa on a broad scale. So that's really a very short story of my education journey. Yeah.
Thank you. So let's talk about Ubuntu. What is the meaning of the word Ubuntu? And tell me about the founding of the Ubuntu Hub.
So Ubuntu is actually an African philosophy.
Okay.
Which it underpins a lot of the cultural values in many African societies and communities. And it's kind of based on a sense of communalism, and it in short means I am because you are. Okay. So it's that idea that we coexist as people, and we are by necessity needing each other, and we need to work together, that sort of thing. So it's a very communal type of philosophy.
Right.
And so when we named the whole idea behind the Ubuntu Hub was that we felt that in African education communities, a lot of the time, the systems have been created with very Eurocentric ideals. And even now, whenever there's professional development or any developments in education, they very, very typically come from the global north. So you will see a lot of curricular materials being shared around Africa, and a lot of them originate in places like the United States or the United Kingdom or other parts of Europe.
Right.
And what we felt was that, and because of that, a lot of the resources are very expensive. So schools in Africa tend not to be able to afford a lot of the professional development or the curriculum design and that kind of thing. And also they aren't appropriate for the societies and communities that we find a lot of the time in Africa. So the idea was to actually understand that we have a skill set in Africa already. There are thousands and thousands of very experienced and very good teachers in Africa. So the idea is to really tap into those teachers' experience and knowledge and wisdom, and allow them the opportunity to share that wisdom with colleagues from around the continent, the subcontinent, sub-Saharan African continent. And that's really what the Hub is about. So the Hub is just a platform, and it's a forum for people to come on and share their experience and to learn from each other, so that we generate this kind of sort of decolonized approach to developing education in Africa.
Well said, well said. And David, what are some of the unique challenges African educators face? And you already told me one, which is the most material comes from the north. And how does the Ubuntu Hub address these challenges?
Well, I mean, the Ubuntu Hub addresses that one by allowing people or educators in Africa to showcase themselves and to really build up their own kind of online persona as an educator. But one of the biggest key challenges that educators in Africa face is that they don't, there's not a lot of money in education. Education systems tend to be very underfunded in Africa. Um, and so accessing affordable materials for learning or affordable resources is sometimes something that's not available. I'll give you an example. A teacher in England can go into can be working in any school in England, any government school in England, and typically those schools will have workshops and professional development days and all that sort of thing on quite a regular basis, probably at least 2 or 3 days a year. Each teacher in the UK will be exposed to some CPD. In Africa, most teachers don't ever have any from time to time, particularly in state schools. It's very, very rare to find that they have this professional development. So the hub provides the opportunity for people like some of the other teachers, maybe, or some other tech companies or service providers, for example, to actually make available resources at an affordable price or free on the hub that's then accessible by any members of the hub. So we've been very keen to make it as cheap and as or free as possible for teachers. And by providing that access, we hope that many more teachers will start to self-develop.
Thank you. And as you just told me about some of the challenges educators face, my next question is, what are some misconceptions people might have about African education systems that you'd like to talk about?
Wow, we could have a podcast on that alone, I think. But misconceptions are that I think it's a bit of an elephant in the room, I suppose. But one big misconception is that the schools in Africa are not good enough, I suppose. And in many ways they aren't. And the reasons for that are complex and nuanced. But I think a lot of it comes down to under-resourcing. But what we must acknowledge is that teachers in Africa, there are lots and lots of very skilled teachers in Africa. They just need a platform and an opportunity. The challenges that education overall face in Africa is that it's influenced so much from other parts of the world. And I think almost there's a lack of a sense of self in education systems where there's the desire to always look to the global north for the newest and the latest in education, whether that's the latest technology or the best curriculum or whatever. So there's a big challenge that education faces, and that is that educators and policymakers really need to understand that education is going to be most effective if it's culturally relevant. And by giving culturally relevant opportunities to people, the education system actually can blossom and grow. Whereas if we continue to take as gospel, if you like, the education systems and everything from the global north, there will always be a power differential between the two. Whereas African education, like everywhere else in the world, it should be standing shoulder to shoulder with other global large global education systems. I'm talking on a very broad and general scale, but of course Africa isn't a country. It's a section. Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree with you. And given the amount of technology that has now come into education, and the pandemic really, I know in my country, in India, online education just went through an absolute boom during the 3 years of the pandemic. And of course, there have been problems since then. How do you see online technology changing education in Africa over the next few years?
Well, Ashutosh, I think it's critical. I mean, I think it's a golden opportunity to really accelerate education in sort of less developed parts of the world. The problem is, at the moment, the technology that we have seems to be, since COVID, the education gap, if you like, between global north and global south, with all the technology tools that we have at our disposal, we would expect that gap would be narrowing. But what we're finding is the gap is actually widening. So it's my opinion that we absolutely have the tools to be able to accelerate education in Africa. We absolutely do. You know, we can reach corners of the globe now that we never could reach before with technology.
Mm.
The challenge is, or the problem is, shall I say, that the developers or the software developers, I think, are developing very, very clever edtech solutions, but they are solutions that only enhance learning or make effective those top level schools. And I think what that's doing is it's accelerating those top level schools and disenfranchising the kind of lower budget schools, if you like.
Right,
So
right.
the challenge that I see and that I think we're facing is we need to find software and technology solutions that are going to target
Right.
SDG 4, but also closing the gap. So
Mm.
providing an opportunity for those last mile schools to play catch up a bit. That's where the focus should be for technology development, I think.
Right.
But you know, there's a lot of brilliant solution out there, and there's a lot of fantastic things. And I was recently at the Bet Show, and some of the toys that you can get
Mm.
for your schools are fantastic. You know,
Right.
I just think that you don't see that many tools
Mm.
that are focusing on helping those last mile schools or the lower budget schools. Yeah.
Well said. Well said. And coming back to the Ubuntu Hub, David, what role does the hub play in helping teachers achieve professional self-actualization?
Well, do you know, one of the loneliest, and I've been a teacher, so I talk from personal experience.
Yeah.
One of the loneliest jobs in the world, I think, is teaching. And the
Mm.
reason for that is that you stand in front of a class of 30 kids. It's an incredibly social job.
Mm.
You socialize with people all the time. But when it comes to your professionalism, you're standing alone in a class full of kids. Nobody really comes to watch you except maybe once or twice a year, and you don't get to watch anybody else. You don't share your professionalism in a sense. You're not
Mm.
actually visible. So the hub really helps teachers
Mm.
to, it has various networking spaces and things, so people can actually chat online and they can check, like, oh, I've had this happen to me in my class today. Anybody else had an experience? So
Mm.
it's, you know, that kind of thing. But if you go into any school, probably any school in the world,
Mm.
and they all have a staff room, or most of them have a staff room, an
Mm.
area where staff can go.
Mm.
And it's at break times when the staff are all gathered in those rooms that you really get to understand the culture of a school, and you really get to see
Mm.
how much teachers need to socialize with each other, how they need to network with each other.
Mm.
But now schools also are very isolated. They often operate as islands unto themselves.
Right.
So, and it's a bunch of reasons. You know, competition plays a big reason. They don't want to share teachers. They don't want to lose teachers. They don't want to, you know, they don't. They try and keep their kind of intellectual property to themselves.
Yeah.
But I don't think that helps the profession. A healthy teaching education system is really where you get a circulation of skills, where you get people moving between schools, finding the jobs that they really want, where you get that kind of fluidity in a system. It's the same in any industry.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm.
and the hub really is the grease for those wheels to happen. You know, the hub also is the opportunity for people to raise their voice. So you know, if you go to a typical EdTech conference or any educational conference, the last person, or very seldom do you actually see teachers at these conferences,
Right.
which is funny, right? Half the people that are actually working at the coalface are not actually informing the conversations. So the hub also has the opportunity for teachers to raise their voice.
Mm.
So we send out regular polls on there so people can answer, but we get a very clear idea about how teachers in Africa, for example, are viewing their leadership,
Mm.
um, what it is they feel their leaders should be displaying better,
Right.
and that kind of thing. So it's very useful, but it's also an outlet. It's an
Mm.
outlet for people. It's a platform where they can gather like-minded. You know, it's a bit like LinkedIn. It's like
Yeah.
LinkedIn for
Mm.
teachers. Mm.
Very interesting. My next
Yeah.
question is, a few minutes back, you had spoken about how the hub offers a chance to be able to get some of the African value systems and their teaching methodologies. But
Yeah.
you also mentioned that Africa is not one country.
That's correct.
How do you incorporate African educational philosophies into the curriculum and resources at the Ubuntu Hub?
That's a very good question, and it's one that we've been asked a few times actually.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, the hub is curriculum agnostic, so we don't adhere to one country's curriculum or anything like that.
Mm.
But what we do claim is that we have a kind of a generalized and decolonized approach to what we have on the hub. And what I mean by that is that of course, my own experience, the majority of my own teaching experience is taken, is in Africa.
Mm.
So I grew quite a good understanding of the general educational landscape. Now, the difference between Malawi and Zambia, of course, there will be curriculum differences. Right. The cultural differences, of course, there will be some cultural differences as well, but there's a lot of crossover. And what we do tend to find is in a lot of and that can be applied across so many different countries in sub-Saharan Africa. There are a lot of cultural similarities that can be used and benefited from, by people who go onto the hub. Now, if you are a teacher in Nigeria, for example, and you go onto the hub and you see somebody who's produced, I don't know, they've started a conversation about behavior management or something on the hub, right? Now, you can still contribute to that. It's an African voice contributing to that conversation. Now, there might be somebody from Tanzania who's also contributing to that conversation. And they might have a different viewpoint. There's likely to be crossover, but there's also likely to be healthy difference of opinion. And overall, the body of knowledge and the conversation will start to become nuanced in the way that you want to become. So you will hear from a conversation what you want to hear from a conversation, but you're also getting those outside perspectives, which is healthy in any discussion.
Fair enough.
So that's really, self-developing.
Well said. And when I was preparing for my conversation with you, I was intrigued by this concept of distributed leadership. Talk to me a little bit about the concept of distributed leadership and its importance in schools.
So this is a leadership model, I suppose, that I am very interested in, and I do a lot of teaching around it. And I thoroughly believe that schools benefit from having a distributed leadership model. So just for the listeners, I guess, but a distributed leadership model is, or a traditional leadership model in most schools, or many schools, shall we say, is very hierarchical. So you have your head teacher or your principal at the top, then you'll have a deputy head, and then you'll have maybe some heads of department, and then you'll have teachers, and then teaching assistants, and so on. So it's a very hierarchical style of leadership.
Right.
But what happens in hierarchical styles of leadership is that people tend to look up the chain to find out what they need to do. So a head of department will get a directive from the deputy head, or the deputy head will get a directive from the head teacher, and so on. So people are often looking up. But what that doesn't manage to achieve is it doesn't manage to make the best use of people's skills. So an example I will use, and it's particularly pertinent these days, is that with young people in the workplace, we have technology minds that the likes of you and I, we're not what we would call digital natives. We weren't born with a cell phone in our hands. We were born before that kind of technology existed. Whereas the kids nowadays, they're much more familiar with technology. And the young people coming into the workplace are much more familiar with technology. Now, let's take a hypothetical example of a school that's trying to develop its communications policy. It would be nonsensical for the head teacher, who's perhaps my age and not familiar necessarily with the communication tools that are available, for him to sit down and create a communication strategy and then roll that out to his deputy, to roll out to the heads of department, and to roll out to the teachers. That doesn't make sense, because it's probably going to be paper-based. Far better to say to Sipo, who has come in as a new teacher, and he's 25, and ask him what he thinks. And then he can talk about WhatsApp channels, Slack channels, like if we did this, we could do that sort of thing. So let's people run it. Let's people drive that. So distributed leadership is about understanding what skills exist on your team and allowing those people to lead initiatives that are in line with those skill sets. It takes a bit of vulnerability from the principal or the head teacher as well, because you're not the expert in everything. And you shouldn't be. You should be employing the best people. So distributed leadership is about allowing those different elements or different initiatives to be led by different people and allow them to actually blossom in their own leadership journey in so doing. The reason why this is really powerful in schools is because schools have hundreds of things going on all the time. There could be a new lab that's been built. There could be a new curriculum that's been rolled out for the young children. There could be a new set of exams that's coming into play for the 16-year-olds, whatever the case is.
Right.
There will always be another expert on the team who is more capable of leading on that initiative than the head teacher, if the head teacher is doing his job properly and employing good professionals. So those people should be leading those initiatives, not the head. And also those people, that means that you can cover 10 initiatives at once, because the capacity of one person is far more limited, of course. So that's why distributed leadership is so important. I believe it to be important.
Well said, well said. I have time for two more questions. Can you share a story where the Ubuntu Hub has helped to transform an educator's career?
We're quite early on in our journey with the hub. We get a lot of testimonials, actually. We get a lot of people saying how they've really found the courses that are on there very useful. They've enjoyed the conversations that are on there. The one sort of there is one story I can think of, and there's a teacher in Malawi that actually I knew when I taught there, who actually is now training as a coach, as an ICF coach, and he has started to use the hub to showcase himself a bit, and he's actually started to get bookings on the hub for his coaching, his individual coaching lessons that he's offering. So that's a small germination success story.
Absolutely.
Perhaps ask me in a year's time, and I'd love to be able to say, Ashutosh, how many hours have you got? And I can start giving you a list.
I know.
But we've got some real budding kind of examples of where we hope that we're making a difference to people. Yeah.
Said. Thank you. And my last question to you, David. You've been an educator yourself, and now you're working to support educators in Africa. What is the most important lesson you have learned from working with educators across Africa?
I would say the most important lesson is that collaboration is so important in education.
Yeah.
People that tend to work as individuals and don't listen to other people, I think, end up causing conflict, or they just end up falling behind. And I think the biggest lesson is about collaboration, and I think probably the ability to listen and to really understand other people. And I think there's a lovely saying that we have is, we've got two ears and one mouth, and we should use them in that proportion.
Well said.
And I think that is a big lesson in education.
Wonderful. And on that note, David, thank you so much for speaking to me about your own amazing journey. Thank you for talking to me about the Ubuntu Hub and all the work that you people are doing, supporting so many educators across almost the entire continent of Africa. Thank you for talking to me about how digital technology is going to change education. Thank you for talking to me about distributed leadership, a concept I did not know, but I'm glad I've learned something from you today. You also emphasize the need for collaboration and listening. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you very much, Ashutosh. I've had a thoroughly good time. I love to be able to talk about this stuff. So thanks for giving me the chance.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the brand called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.